This has to be the lead story right now because it is literally our backyards when we talk about what is happening in downtown Cleveland. On Saturday, you know about the Cleveland Street takeovers. You know about the 90 West Freeway near the West 14th Street, East 55th and Woodland, 93rd Street and Opportunity Corridor. I don't have to go through them all again, but there were several different places. Suffice it to say that it was a lot larger than they first thought it was. Yesterday, members of City Council, Cleveland City Council, met to talk about this and to essentially pin the blame on the chief of police. Literally, everything was aimed at the chief of police, who I can only imagine was sitting there and going, what the hell is the matter with you people? You have hamstrung this division from the beginning. We are still hundreds of officers below budgeted amount, even though you lowered the budget so that percentage would not look as bad. But we still don't have anywhere near the number of officers we do to respond to everything that's going on in this city. But you're going to sit here and point the finger at us. Here's a report from the folks at Cleveland 19 News.
Or Cleveland's top cop saying these illegal street takeovers need to stop before city streets are turned into a state of chaos. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nicole Versansky.
Yeah, frightening video there. I'm Brian Duffy. Chief Annie Todd insisting that the safety of the public will be the top priority as they work really hard here to find a solution to what is, let's face it, an ongoing problem. Today she outlined how the investigation is going.
And vowing to hold those who took part accountable. Aria Janelle live at City Hall after uncovering some new information today, Aria, on these takeovers.
Well, guys, the police chief and the safety director gave us a lot of insight on what happened on Saturday. The biggest update, there were arrests and citations were made this past weekend. Another update, this takeover was a lot larger than we initially thought.
It will escalate into major gun battles. That is what we're headed to if we don't get ahead of this.
Your safety was top of mind as Cleveland City Council's safety committee pressed the city's police chief for answers about this weekend's street takeovers.
We by far are not perfect, but we do our best to balance community safety and officer safety.
On Sunday, Chief Annie Todd told 19 News about 7 locations where these takeovers happened. Today, we found out there were at least 5 other locations. But when asked point blank, were there any arrests?
We had citations issued. We had cars that were towed. We had, I believe there was arrests made as well. But they were outside of the actual parameter of the takeover. We believe they're all connected. They weren't right in the midst of it. It was traveling to and from.
The chief also said they do have people of interest identified.
They're pulling the vehicle information, the faces. What we're trying to do is backtrack to match the vehicles involved to at what point they took the plates off the vehicles.
According to the chief, the people involved could face charges of street racing and trick or stunt riding. Some could even face aggravated riot charges. As discussions of solutions came up, City Council pushed for specifics, but we're told they're still working on a plan and researching their options.
We're trying to figure out what is best for the division. You know, we're using all the tools that we currently have.
All right, I'll stop it there, because I am just so tired of the left-wing politicians that don't give a rat's flaming red A about the cops, nor about the city that they're supposed to protect, because they go ahead and they understaff and underfund the police department in a very, very rising violent city and then blame the cops for not being able to stop this. We want answers, said Blaine Griffin, city council president. We want answers right now. What is the plan? Because if we don't get out in front of us, the next one is going to involve a bunch of gun battles. He's not wrong about that. It is. But what do you want her to do? The resources that they have given the Cleveland police have been sparse at best, woefully inadequate at worst. They have given them nothing that they need. They need numbers. For crying out loud, they can't go. What do you want? Look, all of these thugs, and we're talking about dozens and dozens of cars in the different locations all added up together, all of them took their license plates off. What happens if a Cleveland police officer on patrol sees a car on its way to one of these things with its license plate off? And then what happens if they pull that car over for not having a license plate? And what happens if it happens to be a minority driver? Well, then they're hit for profiling. Don't believe me? Here's part 2 of the story. Not the same story, not the takeover story, but here's part 2 of the story.
Meanwhile,
specific to, be quiet, you. Here's part 2 of the story as it pertains to pulling people over. I mean, this is so extraordinarily important that we get all of this on the record and that everybody understands this. They don't have enough cops. The cops that they do have live and work every day in constant fear of the scrutiny and the potential charges they might face if they don't do it by way of the city's consent decree, by way of, in a manner that will not draw the ire of the civilian review board that's making up to $750 per hour. Hell, they make the longshoremen look like paupers by comparison. But quite literally, what we are talking about here is a bunch of cops that are overmatched because they don't have enough of them, and they're terrified about what they can and cannot do because of what the review boards are going to do to them. And so then we have this massive citywide takeover, and you got city council going, "Hey, police, how come you're not doing enough?" What? I mean, somebody make sense of this for me. Here's the other half of the story. City Council also released this week information on a study that they have done over traffic stops and the number of people that have been stopped in this particular period of the study, the number of people that had been cited as a result of it, and then they broke it all down by race. Why? Because the only freaking thing the left-wing leaders in this godforsaken pit hole of a city, which is what the city of Cleveland has become, the only thing they care about is equity, DEI, in hiring, in performance of law enforcement, all of it. All they care about. Identity, not safety. Are you pulling over more black drivers than white drivers, more white drivers than Hispanic drivers, more this than that than the other? And it doesn't freaking matter. This is the reality of it. This report it's impossible, in my opinion, to justify its existence, but it's what the cops are facing now in the city of Cleveland. Every single thing that they do is under scrutiny because there has to be this commitment, this constitutional commitment to police reform in the city of Cleveland. Well, police reform is getting people killed. Police reform is getting more people mugged, homes burglarized, people assaulted. That's what your police reform is doing. Because you got cops that are absolutely living the Ferguson effect, afraid to get out of their cars and go do anything, so they're not doing a lot. They're not doing a lot because guess what? If they are proactive, you're going to say, why are you targeting that person? So they are forced into doing nothing but being... yes, the opposite of that, reactive. When there's a radio call, we'll go. But until then, if I get out of the car and go confront somebody, I'm going to be questioned by a review board because of this consent decree. I'm going to be questioned as to what my motives were. Was I working on what police used to work off of, which are called hunches? Or am I not allowed to do that anymore? And the reality is, probably not allowed to do that anymore. You better look and see how many hunches have you had that involved a minority driver this month. Because if the hunches have been too strong in one direction and not enough in the other, you stay in your damn car. So what if they don't have a license plate? Who knows where they're going and what they're up to? Don't bother. Instead, let's even your numbers out a little bit. Keep driving a little bit more until you can find a hunch on a white driver. You think I'm making this up? I'm going to take a break here because we're at the bottom of the hour, but I'm going to share with you some in-depth information about that report. If you are even if you live in Cleveland, obviously this impacts you. If you are even a suburbanite, inner or outer ring, doesn't matter. If you are somebody who goes into Cleveland to work, I don't live in Cleveland, but I work in there sometimes. And obviously people go there to socialize and partake in events. You need to know what the police department that is tasked with your safety is facing. They don't give a rat's red butt about the cops or about the victims of the crime. All they care about is making sure that there aren't victims of police brutality and police targeting and police profiling. And that is something that they say happens because the numbers aren't quite adding up right. That leads to Cleveland city street takeovers. That leads to the gun battles that Blaine Griffin is worried about. But they won't say any of that. I'll tell you who's going to have to say something about that. You are. And I can damn sure promise you I will. Doesn't have to be this way. It absolutely does not have to be this way. It is decisions being made like every other big city in this country that is struggling under crime. It is led. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I mean, you keep doing this. You keep doing this. The overwhelming majority of urban, city dwellers in this country vote for Democrats, and then they constantly gripe and cry and whine and moan about why their city is such a hole. You don't do anything different. Cleveland doesn't do anything different than Toledo does, that Columbus does, that Philadelphia, that Chicago. I mean, pick your big urban center, left-wing leadership for decades and decades and decades, and you wonder why the quality of life there is so much lower than it is in other places. That's just the reality of it. And this city is addicted to harassing and haranguing cops. Then you wonder why there's citywide takeovers from thugs when the cops are made the villains. That's the truth. Here's the story. The city yesterday, this is what I was talking about. The city yesterday released an unprecedented report on police stops and searches and arrests, fulfilling a requirement that the city entered into this when they entered into this consent decree with the Justice Department in 2015. So this report looks at 2022 and finds that the Cleveland police in that year made 16,463 stops. Fine. 94% of those stops were traffic stops. Fine. The other 6% were investigatory, which means they must have had reasonable suspicion that to stop the individual, that the individual has or is about to engage in criminal conduct. In other words, that they're following somebody from a drug bust or to a potential drug buy or whatever the case might be. Not a bust, but a buy. The number one reason for the investigatory stops was individual matched description, meaning the cops looked, they have somebody that's got a warrant, this person matched the description, so they pull them over to see if that's who they are. That made up 20%, 20.5% of the stop forms that the officers filled out. After that, drugs, as noted, 16.7%, alcohol, suspicion of alcohol being involved in driving, 13.3%. Dozens of other reasons as well. Among the investigatory stops, 51% of those were black males. 17% were white males. 9% were Hispanic males. But looking at the arrest rates, 34% of the Hispanics that were pulled over ended up being arrested. 28% of the black males that were pulled over ended up being arrested. 25% of the white males that were pulled over ended up being arrested. And apparently, this is a cause for alarm. You know what's a cause for alarm? The fact that they broke this crap down by race. Stop making police make decisions on how they protect and serve and provide law and order based on what color the driver might be. Because then, when they're afraid that the numbers aren't going the right way, that equity isn't being reached, they're not going to stop a car that they should have that's on its way to do Lord knows what, and including how many cars were driving around Cleveland on Saturday with no license plates because they were on their way to the Cleveland Street takeover locations where they harassed and terrorized. I had somebody came up to me at the watch party on Tuesday night in Strongsville. and said to me, Bob, everybody's calling these people thugs and criminals, all of the ones that did the Cleveland Street takeover, or Cleveland Streets takeover. And they said, why is nobody calling them what they are? Because they're out there terrorizing people. Call them terrorists. I'm okay with that. The technical definition of terrorism is committing violent acts in service to a political end. That's the technical definition. But you know what? You're out there terrorizing the drivers, harassing them, in some cases assaulting their vehicles, vandalizing and threatening people. Yeah, I'm fine with that. And they're on the way to doing these things, and if any police officer wanted to stop them on the way, they have to look and say, all right, what color's the driver? No, we've got too many blacks we've pulled over this particular month. We can't pull that one over. Or we've got to get more whites. Chief told us we've got to get our white arrest rate up a little bit, so let's go pull that guy over. What's he doing wrong? Nothing. But you know what? We get to check a box that said, here's a pullover of a white guy. How the hell can you police that way? How can you even possibly think about making a city safer by being fundamentally unfair and discriminatory in your decision making because you have been told to by a consent decree? Safety Director Drummond said this particular report on the surface can potentially have a chilling effect. Why? Mayor Justin Bibb and other city leaders warned the public that the numbers need context. Listen to this. The report describes the what, not the how or the why, said Dr. Lee Anderson, who serves as executive director of the Police Accountability Team. What are the officers doing right? Where can they use more assistance, more training? Is it policy? Is it bad actors? Is it systemic? These are questions we cannot answer. Then tell me, Dr. Anderson, why the living hell are you talking about it? Why is this study being made public if you're saying Bibb says the numbers need context? Then why are you releasing the numbers without context? Anderson says we have to look a little bit more closely to see what this really means. Then why are you throwing the numbers out there to inflame the public along racial lines? Again. Anderson added that while the DOJ flagged search and seizure as an issue, it did not investigate when the consent decree went into full effect in 2015. As a result, there's no empirical data from 10 years ago which tells us if we're doing better or worse. Then again, why are you releasing the freaking numbers? Bibb went on to say it would not only be unfair, but also unethical for the city as well as the public to jump to conclusions and make rash, premature decisions just based on the initial numbers without understanding the full scope and context around this topic. And more importantly, whether there are indeed any problems. Reacting too quickly at this juncture can have very severe consequences for the city and the public, end quote. I mean, I'm just sitting here flabbergasted at the inherent stupidity of this city and its leadership. What Bibb said there is right. It would be unfair and unethical for the public to jump to conclusions based on these numbers without context. And yet they didn't provide scope and context. Why do you release them and then say, here you go, but don't jump to any conclusions? Everybody who sees the number that says 51% of the stops were black drivers and 17% of the stops were white drivers is jumping to conclusions. It's why the entire order was made. It's why the consent decree and the civilian review board, if you will, exist. So that people can jump to conclusions and conclude that the police are racists. And then you're bitching at them when there's a Cleveland City street takeover and that the cops are nowhere to be found. You griping when there's only, you got 200 badges with no chest to put them on. You're understaffed by 200 to 300 officers, and then you're trying to hire an academy class, recruit an academy class, and you get 9 people. Who the hell would want to come and work for you under these circumstances? Then you complain, I'll come, and Blaine Griffin and the council and the safety committee yesterday yelling at the chief, how come you're not doing this? We want concrete plans on how you're going to make sure that these things are stopped and how these people are caught. Give her some freaking resources. Give her some bodies. Stop attacking the cops. Stop inflaming the public against the cops. Stop assuming and putting out reports like this that they're racist. And then maybe you'll get some more volunteers to actually want to take up this profession and work in the city of Cleveland. Maybe experienced officers will think about a lateral transfer from another department to work in Cleveland to make a difference. Then maybe we can actually have the streets patrolled so that big, giant city street takeovers don't happen and people don't get attacked and assaulted the way they did aboard that party bus party bus for the bachelor party that we talked about on Monday. How about that? In 2022, let's see, the 15,467 traffic stops, these are not the investigatory stops, these are the traffic stops. The main reasons included speeding, running stop signs and lights, and driving the wrong way. 60% of the drivers pulled over were black. More than a quarter, 28%, were white. 9% were Hispanic, according to the city. So what? If they observed the traffic behavior, the speeding, the stop signs, the lights, I don't care if it's a Martian in the driver's seat, you pull them over. Officers cited about 3/4 of the ones that they pulled over. 77% of the black females received a citation. That number was about the same for Hispanic and white males and females. 71%, a little less, of the black males pulled over were actually given the citation. And on it goes. I mean, they're breaking this thing down by race and by sex in order to be able to say, oh, by the way, first they say, don't jump to any conclusions. And then they say, yeah, the cops are absolutely targeting African-American and Hispanic drivers. And that's just it. That's just it. That's what their goal is here. So I got two stories in front of me this morning, and I did not know I was going to find the second one. The one I'm reacting to right now is kind of in real time. I prepped up yesterday the city council meeting that they held yesterday. The one in which they were, targeting the chief of police, Annie Todd, and saying, you're not doing enough, and we need to know, because if we don't get out in front of this, the next time it's going to be a lot of gunfire and gun battles in the streets. Blaine Griffin, the city council president, is not wrong about that. Mike Polensik, safety chair, said, we cannot allow our city to be disrupted by urban terrorists who in many cases have come in from as far away as Cincinnati and Michigan. Enough of that crap, too. Enough of that crap, too. Don't blame it on the other cities, and I'm not saying they're not coming from other places, but you know damn well that there are enough thugs in the city of Cleveland to be doing this stuff on their own, too. It is crucial that we learn from this incident and ask the administration what measures will be put in place to ensure the safety of our residents, businesses, and visitors alike, end quote, said Safety Chair Mike Polensik. In other words, he said nothing. He said nothing. But the council members were demanding of the chief, what are you going to do? What steps are being implemented to prevent similar incidents? Well, since we can't find them because they were all wearing masks, and since we can't rely on witnesses maybe getting license plates because none of the cars had license plates on them, chances are pretty good we're not catching them and we're going to do it again. How about this is what we do to prevent similar incidents? How about you get off of your happy little asses and you erase this civilian review board, you end this consent decree, and you make it enticing for police officers to want to join this division, to close that 200 to 300 officer gap that exists between budgeted number of officers and actual number of officers on the streets. How about that? And then maybe the next time some car starts donutting in the middle of I-90 or in the Opportunity Corridor or wherever, and then another one and another one and another one, and suddenly they've got the streets all blocked off, and now it's party time to harass and vandalize and assault drivers. Maybe the next time the first one happens and a 911 call is made, there's a cop a couple of blocks away and lights flashing, sirens blaring, and suddenly the city street takeover lead car, hell, I'm getting out of here. Here come the cops. How about that? How about we implement that, Blaine? How about we implement that, Justin? How about we implement that, Mike Polensik? How about we stop playing stupid political games and let cops be cops again? You want an answer? You want to protect the people of Cleveland? You want to protect the drivers who are visiting Cleveland? Let police be police again.